Okay, looks like we've more or less reached critical mass here, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. Thanks everyone for attending today. My name is Ben Goldstein. I am the Senior Program Manager for Commercial Building Decarbonization. Recognize a lot of your names from the chat, so I know I've met and spoken with a lot of you already, but in case you don't know who I am, that's my title, and in that role, I'm primarily responsible for the Building Performance Colorado program. And today we're going to talk about the legislation that was passed recently and some of the most important changes to be aware of and how this might impact future compliance years. And really want to take this time mostly just to outline the changes, the most major changes, talk a little bit about what the Energy Office has already done to implement these changes and what more we have to do, and then talk about some finish with some next steps. But really going to try to keep my part of the presentation pretty short, hopefully keep it under 30 minutes or so and use the bulk of this time to answer questions, because I know there's a lot of questions out there still. We're doing our best to update everything, but there's still a lot that we need to do and want to make sure that, have plenty of time for everyone to ask questions. Only other thing I will add here is that this webinar is being recorded, so we can post it on the Beam knowledge base for future reference. So people that weren't able to attend live or just weren't able to or just want to refer to it at a later date, you can go back and look on it. So I just wanted to say that at the top. So if you're uncomfortable being recorded, your name or your questions being recorded, I would recommend dropping so you can do that before we get started, but you will be able to go back and watch the webinar and see all the answers to the questions at a later date. So yeah, with that, let's kick it off. Next slide, please, Blake. Blake, can we get the next slide? Okay, thanks. Yeah, so new legislation, it's linked here for future reference. It's HB 25-1269. It was recently passed by the state legislature. And just so you know, Blake is dealing with some technical difficulties. Power's out in the entire area where he lives, so he's scrambling to assist us with this. So please bear with us if there's any technical difficulties. Very much appreciate Blake's flexibility and your all's understanding. So yes, this legislation was recently passed by the state legislature to modify aspects of the Building Performance Colorado program. What I have listed here isn't every single change, but this is the majority of the changes and definitely, in my opinion, the most notable changes. So we'll get into each one of these individually, but I'll just cue them up from the beginning. Some of the biggest changes, probably the number one change that most of you are probably aware of already. The 2026 compliance targets are now going to be a goal rather than a firm target. And this will give, has the audio started? Can people not hear me?
I can hear you, Ben.
Okay, might just be a issue, Felix. Sorry about that. Might try leaving and rejoining. So yes, the 2026 targets are now a goal rather than a hard target, give everyone additional time to come into compliance and meet the 2030 targets. I'll get into the details, like I said, of all of these as we go through. This also allows building owners, eligible building owners, to use 2019 as your baseline year rather than 2021. The reporting period due date will change from currently it's June 1st. I know last year it was extended through August, but now it's fully and statutorily set at November 1st every single year. This will also allow for deemed compliance for buildings subject to local building performance standards. I'll get into the details of what that means. A new enterprise fund, a building decarbonization enterprise fund, is going to be established, which will provide a great deal of additional funding, technical assistance, and other items like that to building owners. There's now a defined process to establish 2040 building performance targets, defined what an operator means in this context for Building Performance Colorado, and some additional or some new benchmarking requirements for people that meet that criteria. And also it allows for buildings that have a data center in the building that don't meet the current mixed use criteria to request individualized targets. Next slide, please. Sorry about that. So yeah, 2026 and 2030 targets. So the existing 2026 targets are not going away, but rather there's just no financial penalties associated with not achieving these targets. So we're recommending everyone treat the 2026 targets kind of as a guidepost, see how you're tracking towards the 2030 targets. But really, the 2030 targets are the ones that people should be most focused on, because the 2030 targets, as mentioned below, are not changing at all. They're still the same as they have been, depending on your building type or whatever compliance pathway you've opted into. And so you just have a more secure idea of these are the targets, don't have to rush and get things done by 2026. The idea of this, behind this, is to give building owners additional time to fully understand and plan for the 2030 targets and utilize a lot of the additional funding and resources that are currently available and things that we are going to make available over the next few months and years. And we'll get into the details of those in a little bit. The 2019 baseline year. So as you're probably aware, the first year of benchmarking data that was required to be reported was the calendar year of 2021, reported in 2022, and that was what everyone's baseline year was supposed to be. But now with the new legislative update, certain building owners can set their baseline year as 2019 instead of 2021. And the idea behind this is that obviously building owners that were reporting in 2021, that was still very much in the midst of COVID. A lot of buildings might have been wholly or partially unoccupied or otherwise not, working at their normal level. And so 2021 for a lot of building owners is not necessarily reflective of the building performance, when the building is fully occupied and operating as intended. So you can now set the baseline year as 2019. Per the statute, this has to be done by November 1st, 2027. So still a little over 2 years to get that done. So this is only allowable for building owners who have selected one of the standard percent reduction compliance pathways. And as a reminder there's a couple different compliance pathways. First, you select if you want to meet the energy efficiency compliance pathway, which uses energy use intensity as the compliance metric, or one of the greenhouse gas reduction pathways, which uses greenhouse gas intensity as the compliance metric. And under both of those, there's targets that are based on your property type as determined by Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And there's also a standard percent reduction pathway for each of those. And so this is only allowable if you've opted into one of the standard percent reduction compliance pathways, but it's only really necessary if you've opted into one of those, because if you are, if you've opted into one of the property types, it doesn't really matter what your baseline is. You just meet the property type target, which is determined not on your baseline, but of course the property type. So if you haven't opted into one of standard percent reduction compliance pathways, you can't change your baseline year to 2019. But again, there's no real reason that you would need to do so. And CEO staff's working to update Beam to allow for this. Haven't done that yet, but it's something we're working on. I'm seeing questions starting to pop up in the chat. I just want to make sure we get through this whole presentation, then we'll go back and answer all the questions, and we'll also be taking track of all questions. So any ones that we aren't able to answer live, we will put the answers to up on Beam in a little bit, and we'll also are developing some FAQs and using a lot of the questions that are asked here to develop the FAQs specifically as it relates to this legislation. But we'll try to get to all of your questions before the end of this presentation. So the reporting period deadline is now November 1st every single year. Not anticipated that this will ever change or that there'll be further extensions past this, besides what's already allowable for extensions to be requested through the normal process, or the existing process, I should say. So the reporting period start date is not defined in statute. The end date was set as November 1st, but it was left kind of open what the start date is, and that's still kind of TBD. So CEO is considering having the reporting period run from July 1st through November 1st every single year. That hasn't been officially decided on yet. So if people have feedback, think it should be a different date, think that makes sense, happy to hear it. One thing I'll note, one limiting factor there is probably can't start it any sooner than July 1st because we want it to align with the state fiscal year, which starts on July 1st every single year. And if we start opening things up and collecting fees before that date, we have to go through a really complicated budgeting process to move all the money around, because technically anything that's not expended by the end of the fiscal year needs to go back to the state. But obviously if we start collecting information or collecting money in June, let's say, and then just 1 month, obviously we can't expend all that money. That wouldn't be an appropriate use of funds. So point being, July 1st is probably the earliest or latest, depending on how you look at start date that we can make, but this would give a little bit more time in each reporting period to upload the data, understand any data corrections you need to make, pay the fees, and all of that. So yeah, if you do have feedback, you can reach out to me or just put it in the chat. If you don't have feedback, that's fine. We're still considering the pros and cons of a couple different options. So deemed compliance. So with this legislation, CEO now has the ability to review the details of local building performance standards programs and determine if it meets the criteria to allow for deemed compliance. The criteria here specifically being if the local program will yield emissions reductions that meet or exceed what's required by BPC. So many of you might be familiar with Energize Denver, the city and county of Denver's building performance standards program and benchmarking program. This is the main one that's on the books now as far as performance standards go. There's anticipated to be others in other locations that happen soon. So this basically allows us as in CEO to review the specifics and the details and the requirements of local programs, starting with Energize Denver, since that's the biggest one and the one on the books now. And if we find that it meets that criteria, building owners that are subject to both compliance standards will only need to meet the local BPS compliance targets. So you'll still be required to report your benchmarking information and pay annual fees to the state, but there's only one set of actual performance standards that you need to worry about. And I think this will be a really beneficial change for people. It'll still ensure that the state's ultimate decarbonization goals and emission reductions goals are met. And that's the whole point of the emissions reduction review. But it also gives building owners some certainty that they only have to focus on one set of targets and not worry about two very similar but slightly different programs. Of course, like I said, you still need to pay fees and benchmarking, and we have to set up everything to allow for that. But I think this will be a really, really beneficial change for people that are subject to both a local and the state program. So this Building Decarbonization Enterprise Fund is another one of the major changes that came out of the new legislation. So this enterprise fund will be comprised of 9 members that include some representatives from state government, from local government, residential building owners, residential building owners that meet the BPC criteria, so over 50,000 square feet, commercial building owners, a building energy efficiency expert, and a utility company. Those are the 9 members that will be on the board, representatives from some of those different groups. Those state government will be someone from CEO, someone from CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, as well as the Public Utilities Commission. So we're in the process of getting that set up now. The statute requires that board members must be appointed on or before September 1st of 2025, and the first meeting will occur shortly thereafter. So no action on that yet, just working to get applications and get everyone, the board, situated and appointed, but that process should really start kicking off in the next couple months. A couple other details on this. The board is going to meet and discuss how to best utilize the funds for this enterprise. We have some ideas of what we think it'll be used for, and those are laid out in statute, really just additional funding, financing, technical guidance, all other manner of things like that directly benefit the building owners who are paying into the fund. And on that note, the enterprise will be funded by a new annual $400 per covered building fee. The first collection date is TBD, still looking for some input on that from the higher ups and from the board. So obviously this is a much larger fee than the existing $100 fee. Should also note that the $100 fee is not going away, because that will fund standard program operations, allow us to pay our vendors that do a lot of great work for us and keep the system running, things of that nature. But this $400 fee is not going to be used for any sort of paying staff or anything like that. It is and required by statute, and that's why it's set up as an enterprise in this way. It has to be used to benefit and pay back the building owners that are paying into this fund, to help them more easily and more cost effectively meet the Building Performance Colorado requirements and standards. And as I mentioned, all items are going to be determined by the board once it starts meeting, but is expected to include, as I mentioned, additional financing, technical support, incentives, etc. I don't want to get into too many of the details of what that might entail, because that'll be decided upon and voted on by the board itself. But like I said, the board is required to meet on be appointed no later than the start of September of this year, and thereafter the meeting should start thereafter and happen pretty regularly, and should have a lot better idea of exactly what the funds will be used for before the next reporting period begins in 2026. Just a quick note on the 2040 target establishment process. This is a pretty big item for future consideration. It just pushed out a few years. So there's going to be a task force that's comprised in a couple of years, made up of 16 different members. I won't go through all the individual members at this time. And so this task force is going to consider benchmarking data from calendar years 2021 through 2026. So the entire program through that date. It will also consider the economic impact of potential standards. That was a big change that happened. And other factors to provide recommendations to CDPHE on the 2040 targets. And so the timeline, task force has to be convened at the beginning of July 2027 with discussions and recommendations needed to get to CDPHE no later than July 1st of 2028. And then CDPHE and CEO will consider the recommendations and issue a formal standards proposal on or before June 1st, 2029, and then it will all be debated and hopefully eventually adopted after revisions and stuff there. So a lot more still to come on that. Obviously, this is a few years out, so not one of the most time-sensitive issues, but obviously I'm sure people have a lot of questions about what the 2040 targets will be. So of course, when we start meeting and having those conversations in a few years, we'll have more information to share on that. But just wanted to cue that up as one of the other major changes from the legislation. So defining an operator for Building Performance Colorado and the requirements. So I quoted directly from the statute here, and I'll just read it so everyone's really clear on what this means. So an operator means an owner, tenant, or other individual or entity occupying or named on the utility bill for a covered building and has access to the utility data for a covered building. So going forward, if a covered building owner is unable to access or report the benchmarking data, the operator, as defined above, is now required to report the benchmarking data to CEO. And this, as I mentioned here, is intended to avert the issue where there's tenants that have access to the utility data, but because initially or previously there was no requirement for the tenant to do anything, they could just refuse to share it with the building owner, which would subsequently mean the building owner is not able to fully comply with the benchmarking standards and the benchmarking requirements for this program. So now the tenant or the operator in this case will actually be required to report the data. They can also still share it with the owner if they want to and have the owner do it on their behalf, but they can no longer just say, yeah, we're not going to do that, which I know had been a significant challenge for a bunch of different building owners. So hopefully this will allow everyone to report, or even if you're not able to report, the onus won't be on you as the building owner if you find yourself in this scenario. And the last one we'll talk about today is expanded eligibility for individualized targets. So now it's allowable for building owners that, quote, demonstrate a significant increase in energy use due to the expansion of a data center or telecommunications operation in the building to request an individualized target. There's a lot of work that we still need to do to define the criteria here, the process, what documentation is required, what's reasonable here. This is a bit of a different sort of request than is currently outlined in the rules and the previous statutes and all that. So we're working on updating all the other individualized target forms and getting those out soon. But this process will take a little bit longer to figure out, but I wanted to cue that up now because it is something that we're starting to work on in earnest. And I know there've been a lot of questions about that from building owners of various types, especially with, more data centers and IT equipment and server rooms and things like that becoming the norm. Wanted to build something in here to account for that and account for increased load growth that really can't be avoided. So a lot more details still need to be figured out there. But on that note, I'm going to talk a little bit about the next steps that we are taking at CEO to make all of this a reality. So first is what we're doing to actually implement these statutes. So as I mentioned previously, setting up BEAM to allow eligible building owners to choose 2019 as their building's baseline year, working with our vendor, Clearly Energy, who manages and maintains the BEAM database to make those changes and allow for information to be shared, do some automated checks to make sure that the building owner is enrolled in the correct pathway or an eligible pathway to be able to do that. So that just takes, some software work that we're working on getting done. Defining the reporting period start date, like I said, what we're thinking right now is having that be July 1st through November 1st, but looking for feedback from the public. So if you do have thoughts on that, you can feel free to put it in the chat, or like I said, message us separately. That's obviously a more a more basic one that doesn't take a lot of software or anything, but we want to decide on that soon. So there's no question once we get closer to 2026 about what the reporting period will be, with a reminder that it is now a statutory requirement to end November 1st every year. So that date will not change. We're going to review the Energize Denver program requirements to determine deemed compliance eligibility and establish the process for confirmation. We've already started on the Energize Denver program review. Still have some work to do there, but we're probably about halfway through that process. But establishing the process for confirmation will take a little bit more time. Need to determine if this is automated, if we can set up the sharing between between the Energize Denver platform and our platform, or if it has to be something that the building owner does. And so just a couple details to figure out there, but that'll all be decided, well ahead of the next reporting season, and certainly before, actual targets start becoming an issue for Building Performance Colorado. The enterprise board kind of talked through that already. It'll be convened, discussed how to utilize, and then crucially, we need to reconfigure the payment portal to begin collecting this new fee and have it not be, overwritten by the existing fee. So some more software work that we have to do there, beyond just actually having the board meet and decide on how to best utilize the funds and the time frame and figure everything out with the board. So we need to establish protocols to facilitate operator benchmarking submissions. If we're requiring now operators to have that requirement, if they're not willing or able to share the data with the building owner, we need to make sure tenants are aware of that or operators are aware of that and have the ability to do so while not, accessing elements of the building owner portal that they don't need to see. So that's something that we still need to build in and figure out. And like I mentioned, that new individualized target eligibility stuff, we're in the process of reviewing and figuring that out as well. But that's certainly not all we're doing. That's just to implement the core elements of the statute. There's a lot of other updates and plans that I want to make clear that we're still working on. Just saw one question pop up about the technical guidance. So we're actively working right now to revise and update that fully to reflect the new legislation, make sure, any typos are taken out, everything's fully up to date, all links are up to date. So this is a pretty lengthy process because it has to go through a couple different rounds of review. Of course, make sure it complies with all our accessibility standards once we actually do all the full updates. So this is probably going to take a few months still, aiming for probably mid-September. So about 2 months from now, we're hoping to have the technical guidance fully updated and reflective of the new legislation and new links and everything listed in there. But in the interim, we're working right now to update the CEO BPC website to have more useful information and links and just be a little bit better of a resource for building owners. Right now, there's some good resources on there, but I've definitely gotten feedback and agree that there's more that we can do to make that an easier place to go to stay up to date on what's happening with the program, find quick links there without having to go through the building owner portal if you don't want to. And speaking of which, the other thing that we're working on right now, or one of the other things we're working on right now, is to fully update the building owner portal and the knowledge base to be more user-friendly, provide more actionable insights, and better help building owners understand their compliance status and options to change. Right now, it can be a little tricky to figure out if your building's even in compliance, what compliance pathway you've opted into, if you want to change, request a target adjustment or do anything. It can be a little tricky to figure that out now. So we're working with Clearly Energy on that right now. They actually have a ton of really great updates already planned that they're going to be making. So that'll take course while we're on the off season between now and the start of the next program season or reporting period. But that is definitely something that we've heard a lot of feedback on. Totally agree we can do a better job there. And that's something we're working on actively. Also working to establish a new mailing list to better communicate program updates and information. Right now, there's a lot of emails that we send out through Beam, but that only just goes to people that are listed on the building, each building in their particular email. So sometimes there's contact information that's outdated, or it might go to the building owner, but it's really, they have a third party that does most of the work for them and they're not aware, or vice versa might be the case. So we're establishing this new mailing list so everyone can sign up for that, opt into that, and then we'll start sending more program updates, legislative updates, things of that nature, deadlines. A lot of that will still be continued to be communicated through the building owner portal, specifically, individual responses to inquiries or tickets or compliance status updates and notifications will still happen through Beam, but we're looking to use this new mailing list to do a lot more of the general communications for the program. So you can expect to hear a lot more about that in the very near future. I did see a question pop up in the chat about when the target and timeline adjustment procedures will be available, and the forms will be available, as well as the compliance pathway adjustment and renewable energy cost effectiveness forms. This is something we're definitely behind on. I do apologize about that. We just had some software issues and some other, really time-sensitive stuff that's popped up, as you might imagine. That happens quite frequently. The one thing I'll say on that, particularly as it relates to the target and timeline adjustments, is that with the change to make the 2026 targets more of a goal than a hard requirement, would really encourage everyone to not submit 2026 building or timeline or target adjustment changes, because it really just, not that the targets don't matter, but since there's no penalties for not achieving the targets, highly encourage everyone to focus all their time and energy on achieving the 2030 targets. We still are going to make these timeline and target adjustment and the other forms I listed here available. The timeline and target adjustment forms should be available on Monday, the 21st, and you should get an email when all of those are available as well. The compliance pathway adjustment, now that the interim deadline has passed, that'll be made available in the next week or two as well, and the renewable energy cost effectiveness forms to follow thereafter. So all of this should happen in the next month and a half at latest. Apologies for this taking so long, but almost done with the bulk of this. Some work still to do, but the target and timeline adjustments should be available on Monday. But again, really encourage everyone to just submit 2030 targets adjustments, and you have until the end of 2029 to do that. So a lot more time. As I mentioned, there'll be a lot more legislation and or not legislation, a lot more resources and financing available to help achieve targets. So you can still submit at any time, and you can always, submit something, you get it, and then you can resubmit. But again, really just want to encourage everyone to focus on 2030. But if you want to do 2026 adjustments, that's still allowable. You just have to do that by the end of this year. And I know we haven't left you a whole bunch of time to do that. And finally, we also want to create a registered contractor list and decide on the criteria to join that. I often have building owners ask for recommendations for people to go to for, building energy audits or consultations, and just in the interest of fairness and competitiveness, we, as the state, can't just give you lists of companies, even though I know a lot of really great people that can help with this work. So if we set up a registered contractor list, as exists in a bunch of our other programs, I think that would be a really good resource to direct building owners to, allow really dedicated and qualified contractors to get on that list, ESCOs to get on that list, and be able to offer a variety of services. So there's a lot more that we're doing. This is some of the main stuff. Just wanted to let you all know there's a ton that we're working on, a lot to do. Not a lot of time to do it, but we remain dedicated to making this program as successful as possible and as easy for everyone to comply with as possible. So finally, next steps here, or next webinar, we're going to have another iteration of this meeting, or of this same webinar, on Tuesday, August 26th. Should have some more updates by then. So if you've attended this one, you might not need to attend that one, though we should have some more updates available to share by that point, some more decisions made, updates to the website and platform and all that. A lot of the forums that I just mentioned should be released by then. So you can feel free to join and register for that at the same place you registered for this webinar if you want to. Though again, it'll also be available as a recording after the fact, and we'll start doing a lot more notification and email about this as well. And so now I'll turn it over to questions. I kept that at just about a half hour. So we can go through all the questions now. I think we can start going through the chat first. And then you can feel free to throw it in the chat if you want. Yeah, I'll just take it. I'm pulling up the list. My colleagues have compiled a list of the chat questions in another document, so I'm just waiting for that to load. Alrighty. So I'll just take them in the order that we received them, in order I see them listed here. I'll try to get through all these as quickly as possible, and then if there's time for more after, we'll do this. So already responded to the one about the compliance pathway, or the individualized target forms, the timeline adjustment forms, the standard target adjustment, and the compliance pathway forms. The target and timeline adjustment forms, besides the new individualized target one that I mentioned we need to do some more work on to make ready, those should be available on Monday. The pathway adjustment form should be available the following Monday, I think is the plan, if not sooner, trying to focus on everything else first. But that should all be available in the next week to 2 weeks. So thanks again for your patience there. How can we verify which pathway we've selected? You can do this by going into the Beam portal and going to the different to your specific building in the inventory. And if you click on it, and there should be a place in there that says this is the compliance pathway that you selected. Though, like I mentioned, there's going to be some updates made over the next couple months to make it a little more apparent, because it can be a little tricky to find and understand. So that is some feedback we've received, totally agree with, and we're working on making that improvement. Will this deemed compliance be handled like a pathway selection for the building? Yeah, so that I kind of mentioned that we need to do some work beyond just reviewing the Energize Denver and the other standards as they become available, but also talking about how best to facilitate that. If it's going to be something that's automatic, if it's going to be something that the building owner has to just, get a notice from Energize Denver. Let's say if we decide that meets the criteria, and just say, I'm all set with this program, don't have to do anything for your program, and then we just take that in and verify it. There's some other things that need to be verified, such as you're up to date with your benchmarking compliance, and it's all paid up on fees and everything like that. So some of the mechanics we still have to work out, but that should be something where we've been talking to the folks at the City County of Denver about, having some internal discussions about as well. So lots more information available related to that soon. Next question I see here: as a state-funded higher education institution located in Denver, we are still only beholden to the state BPS, not Energize Denver, correct? I'm not sure off the top of my head if Energize Denver has requirements specifically for public buildings or for higher education institutions specifically. But I believe that's correct. I would double check with the Energize Denver folks for sure. I'm learning. I know some of the basics of the program, but I'm learning a lot more about it as I dig into the details. I would definitely confirm that with Energize Denver. And if you want to reach out to me separately, I can take a look at your building and see if it's tracked in our database now. Actually, I can't access the chat right now for some reason. I always forget to put my contact information at the end of these slides. That's my fault. Blake or Julia, if either of you are able to access the chat, if you could put in both my email and Julia's email address, as well as the help desk or the help center email address, that would be really helpful. And I should have mentioned, sorry, off the top, that we have a new colleague, a new person working with me in the Colorado Energy Office, Julia Proboner. She is going to be the program manager for commercial buildings. So she's going to do a lot of the work with me on Building Performance Colorado and some of our other commercial building programs and initiatives. She's still pretty new, just a couple weeks in, getting up to speed, but she's going to be a really great resource both for me and for all of you. So you can definitely expect to hear more from her, and as she gets more up to speed with everything, you can start reaching out to her for questions as well. So Blake, if you don't mind just putting our email addresses and the Help Center email address in the chat, if you're able to do that, that would be great. So let me go back to the questions. If we got an adjustment through Energize Denver, will that meet the state requirement as well? We have to submit the same paperwork requesting the adjustment. Good question. So the way that it's set up in the statute and the way it's designed is that we're going to look at it from a top-down level. So instead of going through each individual building and seeing if it meets the same criteria as the state program, for local programs such as Energize Denver, as long as a building is in compliance with the Energize Denver statute and requirements, that's all that matters. If you got a target adjustment through Energize Denver, the Energize Denver accepts, that will be acceptable for state as well. Assuming, again, of course, I need to be clear that we haven't finished our formal review of the Energize Denver program and decided that it meets the criteria. Certainly expect that's going to be the case, to be honest, but I just want to make it clear that is not something we've 100% decided on yet. So, but yeah, if you get a target adjustment through Energize Denver, as long as you're in compliance with their building performance standards, that's all. You won't have to resubmit that same information to the state. Again, once we do that final and formal decision. For the November 1st deadline, what performance dates will be required at the deadline? So yeah, the November 1st deadline is just going to be the new end date for benchmarking, reporting, and fee payment on an annual basis. That was outlined in the statute. The part of that we still need to figure out, because it wasn't defined in statute, is the start date. But it is now in statute that the end and due date for all this reporting will be November 1st every year. So everything that you're currently reporting for your benchmarking information and your fee payments, those will just be due November 1st next year and then every year thereafter. Looking at the base targets for building types, Energized Denver targets are generally lower than the states. Do you anticipate dean compliance being? Yeah, like I said, we're really just looking at it from a top-down level. I think there's some ways that Denver is more flexible. I also think some of their standard targets are a little bit higher. The Energized Denver are typically lower, you say. I think we need to, that's part of why we're doing the review and need to figure that out. But this part of the statute was written with Energized Denver in mind, and I fully anticipate that it will meet that criteria. But if it doesn't, we'll have to let people know, and then that would be unfortunate. But it's something we're taking into account, and have a lot of really, really bright people, smarter people than me, working on that as well. Is the $400 fee per covered building for those campus owners with multiple building? It's $400 per covered building, and again, and that's on top of the existing $100 per covered building fee. So I know that's a lot of money, but we really think that you're going to pay more into the program, but just get so much more out of it by being able to fund a lot of this really great technical assistance and guidance and additional financing that we think is going to be very able to be unlocked with this funding. I guess the question is, for those campus owners with multiple buildings, it's the same as it works now for campus reporting and for existing fee payments. So if, let's say, you have a campus of 3 buildings where only 2 buildings are over 50,000 square feet and otherwise meet the building performance or the benchmarking criteria and cutoff and thresholds and all that, you only have to pay for fees for the covered buildings. You don't have to pay fees for buildings that are under that threshold, even if you're reporting that building's energy use as part of campus reporting, because you're not able to sub-meter or otherwise, remove the smaller buildings' associated energy use from your reporting. So it's still, the fee is just per covered building. Even if you're reporting on more energy use because of campus reporting, you still, just like with the current existing fees, only have to pay for actual covered buildings. If we meet compliance now, why are we required to pay this fee? Seems like a new property tax that was not approved by voters. If we are compliant, I don't think we should be subject to the fee. I think that's fair feedback. I see where you're coming from. That's not something I can answer. I would definitely recommend reaching out to your state representative or someone about that, or someone in our, at our legal team or compliance team at the state. That's not something my input was not asked on that one, but I understand the reticence there, and it can seem unnecessary if you already are compliant. But that's the way that the statute's written, and there's nothing that I can do to change that. Is the move from firm deadline in 2026 to a more goal-oriented 2026 and a firm 2030 due to the results that came out of Energized Denver? Are you seeing buildings struggle to meet goals in that program? I won't comment on how the Energized Denver program is working or how they're doing with getting compliance. I think they're doing a great job, but I'm not the best person to comment on their specific successes so far. I will say that the state's decision to move it back was not related specifically to Energized Denver. I just think you're seeing for pretty much any BPS program that's been stood up is that everyone kind of tends to push the targets back and kick the can down the road a little bit. I think that it makes sense in this case because, by the time the initial legislation was passed and the program was stood up, it's taken us a long time to get the program even in a somewhat functional place, let alone a very successful and easily usable place. And that just didn't give building owners a lot of time to understand the targets and requirements, let alone actually make any actionable changes. Obviously, it was only like 3 years that everyone had, 3 years or so, to make the changes. And when you're talking about, large capital improvements and retrofits, the time period to actually see the yields of those can be multiple years in a lot of cases, and it is super expensive in a lot of cases as well. So it wasn't, the decision to move back was less about anything happening with Energized Denver and more just about what we thought made sense for building owners based on the feedback that we've received from them. And I think it's a really good compromise because it gives everyone more time and will unlock more funding to meet 2030. But also, as I mentioned off the top, the 2030 targets and goals are not changing. So the ultimate requirements of the statute and the overall state decarbonization goals should still be met. So I think it's a good compromise there. To confirm, all properties subject to BPC, whether in Denver or Colorado Springs, will be required to pay the $100 annual benchmarking fee and the $400 enterprise covered building fee for a total of $500 annually. Yeah, that's correct. Are call centers eligible for a different pathway? I think that might depend on the exact nature of your building. Probably not a different pathway, but you might mean like getting an adjusted target or an individualized target, which they certainly could be. If you're talking specifically about the legislation that was just passed and, you know, the whole data center or telecommunications equipment in there, that's part of what we still need to define and go through what exactly that means and how that should be fully implemented. So I would say if you're looking for an individualized target based just on that new eligibility criteria that's been opened, I would hold tight on that and it'll give us some time to get our ducks in a row there, but you may find that you are. But if you think that you're eligible for an individualized target or would like to request a timeline or target adjustment based on the existing criteria, which can all be found in the technical guidance that exists currently, you don't have to wait. You can just go ahead and do that. But if you want to wait for some more information, I would wait on that a little bit. And again, the target and timeline adjustment forms will be available on Monday. I promise. I keep saying that, so I have to hold myself to that. And that's going to happen one way or another on Monday. Will the owner be fined if they do not report their data? Yeah, so right now how everything works is that there is fines for, or civil penalties they're called, for non-compliance, both for benchmarking and for failing to meet building performance standards. The benchmarking fine specifically for not reporting data, it's up to $500 for a first violation and up to $2,000 for each subsequent violation. However, I will say we're being really lenient with this so far. We haven't referred a single building to be enforced upon yet, and for fines and civil penalties to be collected. We think it's only fair to get this program in a really functional and really good place, which I think we'll be more than able to do by the start of the next reporting season. So no one's been fined yet, probably are not going to levy fines for the 2025 reporting season for the data that was just submitted. However, starting next year in 2026, we are going to start being a lot more stringent about that once the program's in a much better place and all the software and everything works as intended. And also I would say people that have complied already, you have to be fully up to date on benchmarking and fee payments in order to be eligible for target adjustments and things of that nature. So people that have complied and have done a really good and proactive job of meeting all requirements shouldn't feel like, oh, we just did all that for nothing, because there's a lot that you'll be able to do before next year that people that aren't fully up to date will not be able to do. Question about the technical resource guide. I mentioned that already, I think. Yeah, probably going to be about 2 months from now. We expect it to be fully updated and available. But like I said, just making the changes themselves isn't too hard, but there's a lot of different reviews that it needs to go through and different people and accessibility reviews and all that. So it's a bit of a lengthy process, but expect that to be ready in about 2 months. Hopefully mid-September, might slip till end of September as things tend to do, but really aiming for about 2 months from now. Will CDPHE AQCC Regulation 28 also be updated? That is a really good question. This is not, there's going to be no rulemaking, large-scale rulemaking happening on this anytime soon. But in order for the 2040 standards to be adopted, once those are proposed and that whole process happens, that can only happen through a rulemaking process. So later in a few years, there'll probably be a new rulemaking for the regs to be updated, which will include 2040 standards, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other things will be aimed to be updated then. So this won't happen for a while, but there will eventually have to be a new rulemaking to update the standards for sure. What about building category distinctions? We own medical and don't see enough distinction for these nuanced tenants. Yeah, I would say in that case, would definitely look for a target adjustment, either individualized target adjustment if you meet those criteria, or a standard target adjustment. I'm really trying not to get too into the details of those because really trying to focus on answering questions related to the legislation right now. But we have done a couple past webinars that should be uploaded now. If they're not uploaded yet, they should be soon. I know there were some software issues getting it uploaded just because of the file type, but we're working on getting those uploaded. So if you want a lot more information, you can refer to the technical guidance. Blake, could you actually post a link to the technical guidance in the chat? And if you're able to, if they have been uploaded, on the Beam knowledge base under the office hours and webinars and recorded training sections, all past webinars, which go really into detail on things like this, those should be, all the details should be listed there, and you can feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions, but really try to keep most of my responses to the new legislation. While I understand that target adjustments for 2026 are not necessary, is there a calculation process that we can look at to see an estimate of the 2030 targets before 2028 to determine if audits, capital projects need to be completed? Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of free tools that are available for this. There's the what's called the pathway selection calculator tool on Beam. Blake, if you're able, if you could post a link to that calculator. That's a quick and easy tool that we have in our in Beam right now. And that you basically just plug in some basic information that you've reported for benchmarking, and it'll tell you where your building is currently at, how it's tracking towards meeting both the 2026 and 2030 targets, and which compliance pathway you might find most easy to comply with. So that's a really basic tool, but that might be a good starting place before you do something as significant as like an ASHRAE level 2 audit or something. And I should add, that's another big change that we're looking to make. There's a lot of really great and free DOE EPA tools that can communicate really well with Beam and take in information directly from Portfolio Manager. We're going to be putting all of that onto Beam as well over the next couple months. If there's tools called Better, Asset Score, Audit Template, some other DOE ones. I'll probably have more of an update for that at the next iteration of this meeting in August, because we kind of just started having those conversations. But there's the Pathway Calculator Selector is a good place to start with for that. And then there's a lot of tools that are available. If you want to look up, DOE tools, Better, Audit Template, Asset Score, you might be able to utilize those on your own now, but we're also working to have those implemented directly into Beam for quick and easy access. So I would look at those. And if I forget who asked that question, but if you want to reach out for more information on that, I'll have that. And that's another thing that we're looking to update on the website and in Beam, links to those tools, links to other tools that exist that help make building owners make decisions of that nature. Will the technical guidance update reflect an updates to the target adjustment methodology and process? Yeah, it definitely will. It'll, I think that's all pretty much in there now, and a lot of it, it's somewhat quantitative, somewhat qualitative, but yeah, we're looking at providing a consistent methodology there for that, so you have a better idea of what's required. There was another duplicate question about it mentioned the compliance will be considered with compliance with Energize Denver, other programs which are more stringent. Yep, that's the deemed compliance piece. If you didn't hear my answer on that, you can go listen back to the recording. Going to move on just because there's a bunch of other questions I want to try to get to in the next couple of minutes, but did answer that one. Will the new technical guidance correct the need for doing a level 2 for parking lot target adjustments? Yeah, I'll be honest, I would really like it to. It's in the rulemaking, and the regulation or the technical guidance has to just reflect what's in the rulemaking. It can't supersede it. If I'm being honest, I fully agree that doesn't seem entirely necessary, but that's in the rulemaking, and I don't have the ability to change that. That was something that would have to be changed in a future rulemaking. I personally have pushed to make that change because I really don't think that's necessary. But right now, there's no way around that, and I do apologize for that. Are building owners being held liable for fees for not benchmarking prior to the new benchmarking deadline? Kind of mentioned that one already. Like I said, we've been pretty lenient up till now. and plan to continue to be for the reporting that season that just ended, because there's a lot of corrections that we need to make to the program, I think, and there's been a ton of staff turnover and people waiting months to get answers to questions. I know there's still a lot of people waiting for us to get back to them on questions. So, like I said, I think it's only fair to be lenient on collecting fees, but starting in 2026, next year, we are going to start being a lot more stringent on non-reporting. But I should say, if there are fee payments that you have missed for any previous years, when the reporting season opens next year, you'll have an opportunity to pay the fees both for the new year and for any missed years, as well as correct any benchmarking data errors from any previous years as well. If we're tenants, how will we know if the building owner is reporting or if we need to? So, excuse me, that's one of the things I mentioned. We still need to message that out to everyone and make sure everyone's aware of the new requirements for operators. I would still think that ultimately it is the building owner's responsibility. So the building owner should work with the tenant to say that you should report. But to be clear, the legislation says that either the building owner or the operator can report. If the tenant is just willing to share the information, if the building owner doesn't have access to it, I know everyone's leases works differently, and it totally depends on the type of building and type of business that you're doing. That's what. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Either can do that, but you can share it. But it's really just that the building owner, the tenant, or the operator rather, I keep saying tenant, but operator means more than just the tenant. It basically just means that an operator, if they're the only people or only entity that has access to the utility data, they can't just choose not to report it. If the operator has it, provides it to the building owner, that's all the operator will need to do. Is the change is really just to make sure that building owners can't just be like, well, my tenant won't give me the data, and so now I can't report. This kind of just gets around that. Not even a loophole, really, but it just gets around that issue. And we had a lot of building owners complain about that. So that was the intent behind that legislation, or that part of the legislation, I should say. Kill buildings with extended operating hours qualify our target adjustment, or we still need to get an ASHRAE level audit to justify this. So you need an ASHRAE level 2 audit for pretty much any target adjustment. So you can get a target adjustment for this, but you still need an audit in order to be eligible. And once, like I said, the previous webinars we've done go into a lot more detail about that. And when the form's released on Monday, it'll be really clear what information you need to provide and what's required. And yeah, I would really like to make it a little easier to get a target adjustment, if I'm being honest, but that has to go through a rulemaking process, and that's not going to happen for a while. So that is what it is for now. Should DOE ESPM platform no longer be available, what protocol or platform source will we use? Yeah, as a lot of you have probably heard, there's been discussions about getting rid of ESPM. I'm not going to get into the details of that now because it's not relevant to the legislation directly, but obviously if the underpinning platform that manages pretty much every benchmarking and building performance standard across this country and other countries goes away, that would be a seismic shift. So right now we're hoping for a best case scenario and planning for a worse. We're looking into some backup platforms that would still provide all the capabilities to do so, and figuring out how much that would cost and how to implement that. So I don't really have too much to say about that other than we're hoping that doesn't happen, but if it does, we have a responsibility to come up with some other successor platform, and if that's required, we'll have more details available, but really hoping that just doesn't happen, but we'll see. The federal building performance standard has been archived by the White House. Does this mean federal buildings should now identify new compliance pathways? Yeah, that's a really good question. I've brought that up to our legal folks. I'm waiting for them to get back to me to see what we should do there. So TBD, don't have a great answer for you right now, but based on the way the initial statute, I can't remember if that was in statute actually or just in the rulemaking, but it said that for everyone's awareness, federal buildings didn't have to comply with benchmarking or with building performance standards because there were federal building performance standards that they had to adhere to. Now it seems those might be going away or have gone away. It seems like federal buildings should report, but I'm still waiting for the legal folks to get back to me on how we should proceed there. So please stay tuned on that. The operator will be responsible to file, but what happens when there are multiple tenants on a single parcel, each having their own utility bills? do we just file for our space? That's a really good question. That's something we're going to have to build into our procedures, and that's like why I said at the end, still a lot of work to do, even though we know a lot of what has to happen. That's a really good flag, though. We'll take that into consideration when we're setting up the process for that, because that's a really good point. We'll have to make some adjustments to allow for that, because it'll be a little different than how it works otherwise. So thanks for flagging that. I will say we just have about 3 more minutes, still a bunch of questions left. I don't have another meeting until 12:30, so I'm fine to stay on and keep talking. Everyone else can feel free to drop if I'm sure there's other things you have to do. But if I don't get to all these questions, like I said, we'll be using these to generate FAQs that we'll put on Beam and on the BPC website, and we'll respond to all of these in some form or fashion. If we are exempt and have given exemption, do we still have to pay the fee, and why? If you've been denoted as a non-covered building and removed from the program, you do not have to pay the fee. Sorry, I didn't understand that answer. What reporting dates are due by November each year? Just the benchmarking and fee payments will now be due November 1st every year, as opposed to June 1st. So just the standard existing benchmarking requirements are that were due by June 1st every year. Those will now be due November 1st every year. Are government agencies exempt from the $400 fee? Yeah, public buildings of any sort, not just government building, but well, I guess any public building is by definition a government building, right? But like schools, local government, state building, no public buildings have to pay any fees, no fees associated for public buildings. Will MAI exempt BPS buildings be exempt for Energized Denver purposes? I think the exemptions there are largely the same. I'll have to double check on that, but it works if you're eligible for, if you're meeting Energized Denver's targets, you don't have to worry about BPS targets. But if you're exempt from BPC, I should say, if you're exempt from BPC targets, you may still have to comply with Energized Denver, and you'll have to work with Energized Denver on that. But I would imagine if you are a non-covered building as defined by BPC, you also would be for Energized Denver, but you'd have to double check with the Energized Denver folks on that to be sure. If the local program meets or exceeds BPC, do those building owners still need to pay both local and state fees? Yes. Several of my owners are not willing to do anything until lawsuits are finalized. I understand the original lawsuit was thrown out, but more have filed recently. Can you advise? Yeah, all I'll say on that is that we're only going to alter or change the program at, if the lawsuit ends up saying that we have to. I'm not a lawyer. I don't really know the likelihood of that happening. Would definitely defer to our legal counsel on that. But I would say that if a deadline passes and the lawsuit has not yet finalized and the response is, well, I don't want to do this because the lawsuit is still active, that's not something we will consider an acceptable response. And if there's fees you owe or benchmarking you owe, you may still face civil penalties for that. So I would definitely pass that along to owners that I understand the hesitance and the desire to not make these changes if you don't have to, pending the outcome of legal challenges. But one was already dismissed. And, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. Who knows what happens with the court system these days? But yeah, I would, as far as the state is concerned, those have no bearing on how our program is operating, and all requirements remain into effect until such time as we have to change them, which we don't anticipate happening anytime soon, if at all. How will the new technical guidance deal with buildings which have many space uses and the need to create a custom EUI target? Yeah, it's same as it currently is. If you meet the mixed use criteria for the program, which again is if you have multiple use types in a building where not one single use type exceeds 50% of the building's gross floor area, you are eligible for individualized targets, which will be released, like I said, next week. And so, yeah, that'll work the same way as it does now. Why is the CEO help desk email a Gmail address and not an official state email address? That's a good question. I don't really know. That's just how it was set up. But the state, we use Gmail. So even if it's state.co.us, the email that you get goes to us via Gmail. So it's kind of just the same way that it works. I can see that's a little strange. I'm sure there's technical IT reason it was set up like that, but I'm certainly no IT expert. So that is kind of a funny question and a good point. I hadn't actually thought about that before, but I think it's just a software IT thing. Is Colorado Energy Office worried this will cause businesses to leave the state and the potential economic issues that it may cause? I think that people will find that overall this will be an economic benefit to the state, generating a lot of economic development by installing a lot more clean energy, expanding clean energy workforce capabilities and opportunities to help in part comply with these rules, help build out people's understanding of how all, clean energy, why it's important, why energy efficiency projects are important. And frankly, I think that if people were to leave the state over fines that ultimately amount to, they can be pretty significant for certain building owners, but I think especially larger building owners, the fines aren't overly onerous. I don't think there's a significant concerns that building owners are going to flee the state. There's BPS standards are starting to become more common everywhere. Lots of states and other local jurisdictions are adopting them. So it's not like Colorado's the only place this exists. Denver's the only place this exists. It's becoming a more established thing. Colorado is one of the earliest adopters to it, but it's becoming a thing in a lot of other places. So I definitely get the concern about that. I get that a lot of building owners don't want to be told what to do with their building. Totally sympathetic to that. However, I think, the necessity to grapple with the climate crisis and take all possible actions that we can to mitigate the worst effects of that, while also expanding economic development opportunities and workforce growth within the state and within the clean energy, pipeline in the state. I think overall it's a benefit to the state and all the residents within. Is there a plan to improve the building ID lookup map? Yeah, 100%. We know it doesn't work great right now. That's one of the main things Clean Energy is working on. Talked actually just to them about that yesterday. Some of the changes they're planning to make might not be for a while, might have to be, closer to the start of next reporting season, but that is definitely something that we are looking to improve. The pathway calculator doesn't account for other high energy use areas. I'm just curious if there's a tool or calculation we can use to estimate the energy efficiency target would be in those cases. Yeah, like I said, the pathway calculator tool in Beam is a very simple calculator, kind of just a guiding thing. Mentioned some of those other federal tools that are available. If you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to me offline and I can give you some. And like I said, we're going to make some of those available directly within Beam and eventually elsewhere as well. Are there any plans to update pathway for standard GHG percent reduction as it's currently written? Many properties will meet this pathway in the future due to emissions factors published in the technical guidance. Yeah, that's something a lot of people have brought up. The deemed emissions factors were created to try to account for the natural greening of the grid, and it was intended to be set up in a way that would both give building owners credit for the improvement that they've made at their buildings while not getting undue credit for just the grid naturally becoming more decarbonized as more renewable energy comes online. Things like coal plants are retired, etc. We've had some feedback that wasn't the correct methodology to use, so perhaps that's something that will be looked at in a future rulemaking. But again, that's something that would have to change in a rulemaking, not something that CEO staff has the authority to do on our own. So yeah, I appreciate you flagging that. But that's not something that's being considered immediately this time, but it is something that a lot of people have brought up to me and we are thinking about. Will the technical guidance allow for using DOE methodology, which is equivalent to ASHRAE level 2? Yes, I should mention, just people seem to be confused. The technical guidance currently exists. I believe Blake linked to it there. And so the only thing that's changing in it is just that it's going to reflect the new legislation as well. The technical guidance doesn't supersede or say anything differently other than what's outlined in the statutes and in the Regulation 28 rulemaking. And in there, it says that an ASHRAE level 2 or equivalent audit is allowable. So it doesn't have to be ASHRAE level 2, but it has to be equivalent to that level of depth and detail. If the tenants, quote, operators refuse to provide utility data to the owner, does CEO have the ability to find the operator? This is another thing I need to clarify with our legal team. I believe the answer is yes. I hope the answer is yes, because otherwise that statute doesn't really do anything much at all, does it? So I believe and hope and think the answer is yes, but I have to clarify that, and I'll make sure to get back to y'all before the next reporting season starts. Very good question. How can I get help with pathway selection, help desk? Yeah, if you submit a help center ticket, you can get help with a pathway selection. You can also feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can give you resources on that one. Depending on what your answer or question is, it might be really easy, it might take more involved detail. So you can feel free to go through the help center or reach out to me directly for questions with that. You might start with the help center because if it is a basic question, they will probably be able to assist you more quickly than I will. But if it is a more advanced question, they might need to tag me in or Julia in. So yeah, I would recommend starting with the help center, and if they're not able to answer your question, they'll probably just pass it up to me, or you can reach out to me via email if they don't have good answers for you initially. Is an ASHRAE Level 2 audit required for Colorado State benchmarking? Not for benchmarking. If you're just benchmarking and sharing your data, all you need to do is upload the information to Energy Star Portfolio Manager and allow it to share with the state's database and pay associated fees. But ASHRAE Level 2 is required if you want to do a target or timeline adjustment in most cases. But just for benchmarking, an audit is not required. Will building owners receive a bill invoice for the $500 annual fee? You should be receiving one already for the existing $100 fee. When you pay the fee, it should generate a receipt or an invoice saying you've paid the fee, you have it, you're all set for the year. If you're not, please send me an email so I can correct that. I hadn't heard from anyone this year that wasn't going out, but if you're not receiving that and you have paid the fee, please let me know via an email. Send that right to me. Don't go through a help ticket because one of the things I'm working on, in addition to everything else I just talked about in the next few weeks, is going through the payments and making sure there's people that made incorrect payments or need to be refunded. And so I'm working on all that now. While I'm doing that, it would be really good to know if people didn't receive an invoice for their payments. So please reach out to me directly with any of those questions. Our buildings need to pay $100 fee for June 1st. So do we too need to pay an extra $400 fee by November 1st? By November 1st, 2025, it says. That is a good question. The first date and time frame of the $400 fee collection is still TBD. That is something I'm waiting for some direction from our leadership team and legal folks to opine on. So there's no due date yet for that, but that is obviously something we need to let people know of before we can ask you to start paying the fee. So the first fee collection date is not, the due date will not be November 1st, 2025 for sure. That would probably be the earliest, honestly, that any fee would be collected, but there's no due date or start date for that yet. We'll let you know about that as soon as we can. Okay, there might be other questions people have, but we're already about 10 minutes over time. I want to give everyone some time, well, not time back because I stole time from you, but we'll end the call now. You can always feel free to reach out with other questions, comments, concerns. Like I said, I think we're doing a much better job of staffing up and have a lot to do. But always happy to receive feedback and take anything you have to say into consideration, answer any questions. So if you do have other questions, you can drop us a line in the help center, send us an email, and we'll take all the questions that were asked here and use these to develop some additional FAQs. There's a lot of FAQs on the Beam knowledge base already, but we'll put some together specifically related to the new legislation and requirements, and we'll continue to update that as we make some decisions. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today. Feel free to join the next iteration of this meeting where there's probably going to be some different questions asked and some new details at the end of August. Big thanks to Blake and Julia for staying on late and helping with this. And yeah, hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Take care.